Crispus Attucks was born in Framingham, Massachusetts in 1723 to Prince Yonga, an enslaved African shipped to America, and Nancy Attucks, a Natick Native American Indian. Much of Crispus's life is shrouded in mystery, and it was uncertain whether his status was enslaved or a free man. What was his occupation? A sailor? Dock worker? Or was he a merchant seaman? One thing is certain. This man, who came from humble beginnings and relative obscurity, was to become one of America's symbols of the anti-slavery movement, and still has an impact 250 years after his death as one of the 100 greatest African Americans. What is the historical significance of Crispus Attucks? He is considered by Americans to be the first individual to be killed and to sacrifice his life for a cause that would become the catalyst for change that eventually brought about the transformation of the 13 English colonies into the 50 United States of America. Attucks is officially perceived as the first victim of war crimes of the American Revolution, 1775 to 1781. However, the beginning of war crimes against Africans first lay within the acts of enslavement and being carried beyond their land, and secondly, lay within the rhetoric of the American Constitution by its founding fathers, who did not view Africans and other ethnicities as equal before the American Revolution and even after they had secured victory from the English. At first, the Continental Army, formed by Congress for the purposes of fighting the English, did not permit any Africans to join their ranks. History has always told the story of how Africans fought on both the patriot and loyalist sides throughout the War of Independence, but in the centenary celebrations in 1876, another war crime was committed when there was no acknowledgement of their contribution. It took a further century to rectify this when in 1986 US President Ronald Reagan signed into law the Black Revolutionary War Patriots Act, resulting in the establishment of the National Liberty Memorial in Washington, D.C., in memory of the 5,000 Africans who served the cause of independence from 1775 to 81. As the revolution progressed through the 1770s, it became more and more acceptable for freed Africans to join the army. This provided an incentive for the freed African, as they had potentially something to defend, their status, and something to lose, their freedom. At this time, there was great reluctance from Congress and the Continental Army to enlist enslaved Africans, as the thought of placing guns into the hands of large numbers of enslaved Africans could instigate a rebellion, as they had nothing to defend, their enslavement, and everything to gain, their freedom. In some colonies, war crimes were further committed when laws were passed that encouraged plantation owners to send Africans to the front line in place of themselves or other male family members, and this gradually saw an increase in the number of Africans being enlisted. As patriots feared guns in the hands of Africans, the English crown encouraged it. Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, and Sir Henry Clinton both issued proclamations that actively recruited enslaved Africans and indentured servants, declaring them free if they wanted to fight on behalf of the English crown, with the promise of freedom as a reward. It was England who quite possibly first openly promised freedom to Africans, and Lord Dunmore's Ethiopian Regiment was formed in 1775, which consisted of runaway slaves and a few freed Africans. Although Lord Dunmore was later disgraced in defeat and was forced to leave Virginia after the war, was this the reason why many Africans began to associate the English army with liberation and freedom? The Patriots began to counter the moves of Lord Dunmore and others like him, and gradually over a period of time, Africans fought on both sides of the Revolution. Whether they were free or enslaved, they were strategically recruited to weaken plantation owners and officials who were standing up and promoting the opposing side or the opposing cause. One African unit formed by the Patriots was the Rhode Island Black Battalion, established in 1778. This followed a different approach, though Africans were recruited through duress as well as voluntarily. Commanded by Colonel Christopher Green, the idea of enlisting Africans was taken from General Vernon and adopted by the Rhode Island Assembly. It initially began with around 88 enslaved and freed Africans and grew to around 225 members. They fought in the Battle of Rhode Island in 1778, but did little else. Because of the fear of armed Africans, many were assigned to auxiliary roles such as wagoners and cooks and waiters and artisans, and even spies, although there are records in South Carolina of a few Africans being appointed as ship captains. However, despite this fear of armed Africans, they made up around 4% of the Patriot Army and around 25% of all active military capacity of both Patriot and Loyalist sides. African soldiers were present at Yorktown and played a key role in England's defeat, manning the American siege lines to defeat the English army that was led by Lord Cornwallis. We often think of war crimes in the context of the mistreatment and unjust actions of soldiers and governments towards civilians in times of war, but how are war crimes committed towards these African men and women who also laid down their lives for this ideal of freedom and liberty? An ideal that many had been continually denied. Was it just a fear of rebellion from armed Africans with guns that made the plantation owners apprehensive? Or was it possibly a fear of something far more powerful that the plantation owner wanted to deny? This something could be called the hero paradox, where the African could not be awarded the status of hero if victory was achieved. How could they be rewarded or compensated when the very constitution that they were fighting to uphold did not recognise them as men who were equal and did not denounce slavery? The African seemed only to be of use in capacities where they contributed to numbers and body counts, and allowed only limited opportunities to demonstrate such heroic qualities such as bravery, taking risks, and showing initiative. This is ironic when, in retrospect, Americans now recognise that the first hero of the Revolution was in fact a person of colour. Does this paradox stand as the greatest war crime of the Revolution? So, how were these Africans rewarded for their heroism? Of those who were loyalists to the English crown, around 5,000 enslaved Africans and their masters were relocated to Jamaica, East Florida, and other locations in the Caribbean, while around 3,000 were transported from New York to Nova Scotia. And I pick up on that story in an earlier podcast episode. A colony which became Sierra Leone in Africa was also provided for Africans. It must have been the strangest thing to be rewarded with relocation back to your motherland in 1792 and eventually in 1807 when the English finally abolished the practice of slavery. What was the fate of those Africans who were patriots? Was their act of patriotism worth their while? These war crimes continued as the only compensation paid was to the plantation owners. There were no rewards or reduced service, and many Africans had their promise of freedom rescinded once the war was over. By 1792, as some loyalists made the choice to sail to a new life in Sierra Leone, many American colonies banned Africans from joining the military, which became the preserve of free, able-bodied white male citizens. The hero paradox had been firmly put in its place, and the old order was re-established. The legacy of one revolution brought about another, not against an external power, but the issue of slavery created internal conflict between the North and Southern colonies, which went on after the 1803 Louisiana Purchase, to determine how the new states would be assimilated into this pre-existing divide, resulting in victory of the Unionists over the Confederates and the signing of the 13th Amendment. If you liked this podcast, then stay on this listening platform and listen to my other podcast episodes related to this one, such as The Book of Negroes, How Africa Came to Nova Scotia, The Louisiana Purchase 1803 Expanded, and Whose War Is It Anyway? And don't forget what I call the heart and soul of the Stories to be Told movement, my stories or poetic narratives, Caribbean Wind, Caribbean Rush, Nights at the Round Table, the Berlin Conference 1884, and Gone with the Wind, Macmillan's Speech for Change. They're all available on the website in both ebook, Kindle and paperback formats. Well, I have contacted my first winner for the month of April. Well done and congratulations to Marcella. You'll be receiving a copy of Aspiring Authors magazine for Black History Month 2022. If you're on the list, then watch out for a direct email from me from info@storiestobetold.com, where I'll be announcing next month the winner for May. Remember, I've decided to run this promotion beyond the month of March and continue to give away a free copy each month right up to UK Black History Month in October to a lucky winner on my email list. So visit the website at storiestobetold.com and register for your free samples to enter the draw. There's still plenty of time to enter. And feel free to like, follow and share us on social media when you visit the website. Just click onto whatever social media link you'd like to follow us on. And as always, it is a pleasure and a privilege to share my learning journey with you in this podcast series, and I encourage you to either continue or begin your own. History is a matter of fact or perspective. I'm Tracy DW, and this is a Stories to be Told podcast. Stay safe, stay well, stay blessed. Thanks so much for listening again, and I'll see you on the next